And now it's time for us to discuss more of those headlines and simple keywords. About Adam joining us on the line. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena.
As I stumble through your name.
I think you know me well enough to know my name, don't you?
It's early in the morning. I apologize.
Yeah,
I have to ask you because we do this
yeah,
almost every morning, and we talk
yeah.
about the weather and how it's too cold or too hot or too humid or the air is too dirty. Do you think you also suffer from a case of eco anxiety?
Yes, is the simple answer. Someone from being living in the UK for pretty much most of my life. Yeah, it does get to you. I mean, the cloudy weather, the rain, it
The
makes you a little
gloominess?
bit, the gloominess, it does make you a little bit depressed at times. But coming to
Hmm.
Korea, yeah, I find myself very polarized in emotions because summers get really hot and then winters get
Oh,
really cold. So it's a bit of a tough one because in summer,
yeah.
I like the summer, but it's a bit too hot in Korea when it does get hot, especially August time. And in the winter, it gets a bit too cold. There's no in between. So it's really it's a difficult thing to,
I can't
yeah,
decide whether or not for me it's self-fulfilling or it's a legitimate excuse for me to feel under the weather, so to speak, so frequently
yeah,
because of course we expect summers to get hot. Of course we
yeah,
expect winters to get cold. So every year we do the same dance, yet we find
yeah.
ourselves anxious.
Yeah, so I find myself going out of the house a lot more during the spring and fall seasons.
All
So
right.
I
So
am eco-anxious, if that is the right term to use.
yes, I think
Yeah.
so. I mean, so I guess these days are not so bad. During the daytime, it's warm.
Yeah, that is right. But the mornings are a bit cold, so it is a bit of a struggle to get out of bed. That's another thing that the weather does affect, getting out of the bed. It's a bit tougher when it's colder, I think. Yeah.
All right, listeners, do chime in. Do you also suffer from a case of the mean eco anxiety? Let us know. It's time for us to turn our attention to keyword news. We're going to try to clarify some of these headlines for you. This is our first pick of the day.
Easing virus curves.
Speaking of pandemic, I think COVID anxiety was once pretty
Mm,
predominant, I think, in South Korea and the rest of the world, right?
yeah.
COVID infection still raging on. Eyes are on how and if the government will ease the standing virus curves. As we mentioned in the headline, the incoming president wants to see the curfews gone. What can we
Mm.
expect?
Right. Well, the government had hinted at the possibility of what it's been calling gradual easing of restrictions. But as you mentioned, the Presidential Transition Committee has suggested that the government just scrap the restrictions on business hours completely. Shin Yong-hyun, the transition team spokesperson, said as soon as the health authorities confirm that the spread of COVID-19 has passed its peak, the business restrictions will be abolished. So that's a bit of a preview on what the Yoon Suk-yeol's administration is looking at. Under the current rules, though, restaurants and cafes are still required to close at 11 p.m. The private gathering cap is 8 people. Shin noted that the special COVID-19 committee under the transition team has determined that 9 out of 11 organizations believe infections have entered a downward trend. Health officials say they are taking the committee's proposal into consideration, along with other opinions from other experts as well. And of course, the KDCA will make an announcement on any adjustments, if any, after a meeting tomorrow. But of course, the stealth Omicron wave is another variable that might affect that decision.
All right. The chair of the transition committee, An Chul-soo, has announced two plans that have the support of the health authorities. It seems, being a medical doctor himself, I do think there's a little bit more
Mm.
weight on that. Run us through what
Mm.
they are.
Right. So the first is to establish a platform that uses big data to analyze the number of people infected with COVID-19 and the side effects of the vaccine. So a more scientific approach. The other is conducting a mass antibody test on 10,000 people to gauge just how far the virus has spread, which will help account for unreported cases. Now, similar studies have so far been conducted only partially on particular age groups and in certain regions. So the sampling size was a lot less. And so the distancing rules should be guided by science and not politics. And of course, him having a scientific background,
Hmm.
he is pushing for that even more so.
Sure.
Now, the KDCA and Transition Committee have reportedly agreed on the expansion of the COVID-19 antibody testing to include all age groups and regions. The KDCA says preparations are underway to decide on the timing of the testing and compensation as well for those who get the test. Meanwhile, from today, vaccinations for children aged between 5 and 11 will begin as well. More Paxlovid oral treatment pills are also coming in to the country today. A growing number of local clinics are also expected to provide face-to-face treatment for COVID-19 patients. That's as the government yesterday began accepting applications at smaller clinics for the medical service as well. So there are some measures in place to try and tame the spread of the virus amid this kind of contemplation of easing social distancing rules and the incoming administration. And just is kind of being dubbed the kind of Anthony Fauci of Korea. And so he is quick to work on his policies and proposals at the moment.
In the meanwhile, Ahn Cheol-soo has rejected the invitation to join Yoon Suk-yeol's cabinet. I thought that was also an interesting move. It seems unrelated, but it kind of is, right? Because he's also part of an important element of the political circle now.
Yeah, I mean, he has been dubbed to kind of lead something in terms of, I don't know, health or welfare.
Right.
But apparently that's not going to happen. But still, there are ways to go until start of the administration, and we know what Ahn Cheol-soo is like, so we'll have to see.
All right, wait and see approach for both accounts. Ahn Cheol-soo's next big move, and as well as, of course, the standing social distancing rules. We'll see the announcement tomorrow on Friday. On to our second keyword of the day.
Yoon hard at work.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has been busy over the past week preparing for the presidency, of course. He's met with the Archbishop of Seoul and has spoken with the Dutch Prime Minister. What's the latest?
Right. Well, Yoon Suk-yeol and Peter Chung-soon-taek met at Myeongdong Cathedral. They discussed the importance of social integration and overcoming social conflict and division. Chung said he hopes Yoon's new government will work to achieve social integration and work to help people who are marginalized. These are usually topics that are brought up between political leaders and religious leaders. Now, he also volunteered in serving food to homeless people to keep his earlier promise with Chung during the election campaign. Yoon had actually visited Chung on February 9th and promised to participate in that food service after the election. He initially planned for it to be after the inauguration, but he said he wanted to go earlier to keep his promise. And he also promised to visit the Archbishop again after he's inaugurated as well. Now, Yoon is a Catholic. He's known to have been baptized by the name Ambrosio and went to a Catholic church during his college days as well.
How did Yoon's phone call with the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte go?
Right. Well, Yoon's spokesperson Kim Eun said Yoon proposed expanding bilateral cooperation in the semiconductor sector. The two also shared serious concern, in their words, over North Korea's ICBM test last week. Kim and Rutte agreed enthusiastically that synergy from the two countries' cooperation will be very large, as South Korea and the Netherlands are leading nations in the semiconductor sector. They also agreed to further strengthen the two countries' solidarity on the international stage as well for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Rutte invited Yoon to make a state visit to his country after Yoon takes office. The president-elect promised to begin discussions to realize the visit at a convenient time, so we could see a summit of that sort happen after the inauguration. And Kim noted that the Netherlands is South Korea's second biggest trade partner among EU nations and also among the top investor groups in South Korea. So, of course, it is putting some weight into diplomacy with the Netherlands.
All right, moving on to our third keyword of the day.
Asset increase.
So recent data shows more than 8 in 10 ranking public officials saw their personal assets grow in value last year amid the pandemic. Run us through the details of the report.
Right. Well, ranking public officials are mandated by an ethics law to annually disclose their personal wealth. The government gazette showed that a total of 1,978 senior government officials and public officials declared an average of just over 1.6 billion won in personal assets as of the end of last year. That's a rise of over 166 million won from a year earlier. It found that 83% of the officials reported an increase in assets. The rest admitted, of course, a decreased wealth. President Moon Jae-in reported his wealth at just under 2.2 billion won as the end of 2021. That's an increase of 114 million won from the previous year. A Changwon official said Moon's after-tax gross income during his presidency was 1.64 billion won, and he has spent about 1.3 billion won of that amount. Notably, Moon and his wife reported a debt increase of about 1.5 billion won due to their need to finance the construction of a retirement residence in Yangsan, presumably after Moon's presidency. Among Changwon officials, Nam Yong-suk, who is an economic advisor to the president, had the most wealth, reporting 7.6 billion won. I think that's fitting because he is an economic advisor. The Minister of Government Legislation, Lee Gang-sup, topped the list actually in terms of overall wealth, reporting his personal wealth at 35 billion won.
There is sort of this underlying notion of distrust when these numbers are revealed, but as long as everything is fair and legal, the means that they gain or lose in some cases their assets, it shouldn't be a problem, right? It's actually a really similar story among lawmakers as well.
Yeah, so the figures are pretty much exactly the same when it comes to the National Assembly. 83% of 289 legislators who had disclosed their assets said their assets expanded compared with a year earlier. That's according to National Assembly data. Chun Bong-min of the People Power Party topped the list of wealthy lawmakers with personal assets totaling 106.5 billion won. Excluding the top three richest lawmakers, lawmakers on average had about 2.4 billion won worth of assets as of the end of last year. Now, Seoul Mayor Oh Se-eun reported personal assets worth about 6 billion won as of the end of last year. That's the largest among the 14 heads of metropolitan governments across the country. And it's also not really surprising that the richest lawmakers are actually from the PPP.
We'll leave it there for now. On to our fourth keyword of the day.
Space rocket.
Korea successfully test-fired a solid fuel space rocket as a part of a project to eventually deploy civilian and military surveillance satellites. It is about bolstering military capabilities after all. Tell us how the test went.
Right. Well, the launch was conducted by the Agency for Defense Development. It took place in Taean, South Chungcheong Province, just south of Seoul, and the ADD tested a new solid fuel engine that is designed to put small satellites into low Earth orbit for surveillance operations. Now, solid fuel rockets are simpler and more cost-effective to launch than liquid fuel space vehicles. Now, while liquid fuel rockets typically require 30 days to prepare, solid-based ones can be ready in less than 7, so it's more efficient and quicker in that way. Now, the Defense Ministry called the successful test an important milestone in Korea's development of an independent space reconnaissance capability. The test also came as North Korea's development of space surveillance and ICBM technology progresses as well. Now, while the ministry did not explicitly frame Wednesday's test as a response to the North's recent flurry of missile tests, the launch of this solid fuel space vehicle did come after them. The ministry said Wednesday's test was aimed at verifying essential capabilities of the space vehicle, including fairing separation and altitude control features. Now, the ministry added that it plans to launch an actual satellite mounted on the rocket in the future following additional development. And there's going to be future cooperation between the ADD and Korea Aerospace Research Institute as well to develop a new rocket powered by both liquid and solid fuel engines. So we'll have to see the progress on that.
All right, and quickly on to our last keyword of the day.
European economy.
So Europe's economy is increasingly being strained by Russia's war in Ukraine. How bad is it looking as we speak?
Yeah, not particularly good, I'm afraid. The war is stoking what's known as stagflation. This describes a period of high inflation and weak economic growth. And of course, sanctions on Russia following its invasion have pushed energy prices to record highs across the continent. This is sapping confidence and raising the risk of another recession, even before some states have recovered from a COVID-19 fueled downturn. Now, Germany is the bloc's biggest economy and one of the most reliant on Russian energy, in fact. So it is likely to be among the hardest hit from the Ukraine conflict, and Berlin is working to alleviate that problem. And it's actually halved their growth forecast for the year to 1.8%. Now, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde also warned that as the conflict drags on, Europe's economy as a whole could suffer more than feared than just a few weeks ago, in fact. So it looks like the situation is becoming more dire.
Mm.
Spain, for example, one of the bloc's biggest economies as well, inflation is soaring over there, 9.8% in March from 7.6 in February. Now, while the central bank would normally tighten policy to fight inflation, such a move could exacerbate a recession that's hurting consumers even more. And to mitigate the risk, Lagarde promised to move only by small increments without making longer commitments. The stagflation is a real headache for policymakers because there are very few options of how to alleviate the problems, because drastic moves can lead to a recession, but no moves at all could, of course, fuel inflation and make the economy worse.
Hence the ongoing delicate balance. It poses a significant risk to growth at Europe as a whole. Thank you so much, Adam, for today's coverage. We'll speak to you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.